I learned, number one, I think the most helpful thing for me, which I did learn, is that the eating disorder is a totally different entity than your child. And that really helped me to visualize. I learned that later than I would have liked. It was when she was with her outpatient team. But it's really that, all of these things that get you frustrated, or when, the defiance, or, there's things there that are so hard.
Hello. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Isabel with the Into Place Therapy podcast. I'm a therapist, a certified eating disorder specialist, and the owner of private practice Into Place Therapy in Arizona. So in today's episode, I'm joined by Erin Lundeen, who is a nurse, a nursing professor, a National Eating Disorder Alliance volunteer, and also a parent. So today we're going to talk some about Erin's experience and her family's experience navigating her daughter's eating disorder. So this is really for anyone who's supporting a young person through an eating disorder. And I hope also a reminder that caregivers deserve support too.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, thank you for coming, Erin. I really appreciate you coming, especially we're in Buffalo right now, which was very far away for both of us, but you had a long drive and it means a lot that you're here.
Yes, thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited.
So how about to start, I'd love to hear a little bit just about yourself and your family.
Okay. So like you said, I'm a nurse. I've been a registered nurse for about 21 years now. I entered the world of academia about 6 years ago, and I have 3 kids. Sam is 19, Sophia is 17, and Seth is 15. And, I live in a very rural area, so we enjoy doing lots of things outside, and this time of year is really great. So I'm actually back in school. I'm kind of a lifelong learner, so I always like to learn new things. But, I think that sums it up.
Awesome. And so, I'm wondering maybe if we can go back to the beginning of kind of this eating disorder showing up and share with us a little bit about like what life was like for you and your daughter, and maybe what were some of those first signs?
Yeah. So we're going back to fall of 2021. My daughter, Sophia, I call her Soph, she was in 8th grade. And she has always been, she loved sports. She loved school. She worked really hard at school. She's naturally very smart and intelligent. But I noticed that fall of her 8th grade year, things started to tip a little bit to a point that I was worrying about her. She became very perfectionist about her schoolwork. She was doing everything she could for work or for school, to the point that her teachers were saying, well, you could work on these problems. And for Sophie, it was like several hours every single night. And she had 100% plus in most of her classes. She was in the, honors courses. And that was really the first time that I noticed things starting to tip a little bit, that I was getting concerned, that I thought, this really is different for her. It's a little bit more intense. So then it was after Christmas of that year. So we were just entering 2022, and we have a volleyball team that the middle school girls do, and it's just a really short season. It's kind of in the middle of winter. And Sophie had played the season before, and she was really looking forward to playing again. A lot of girls go out for this team, not very many make it. And I think there was a little bit of anxiety there. But I just noticed a couple things that were, seemed pretty harmless to me, but I think it's probably in hindsight that they were also a little bit of red flags for me. She first asked if we would be able to eat a little bit healthier, like that word healthy. She said, we had all this stuff over the holidays. I just am really wanting to feel better. She started to look online to social media for some workouts to try to get herself ready for this volleyball season. And then, the next thing I noticed was she was wanting to eat only organic. And then, she was wanting to go to the grocery store with me, which she never had. So all of these things were going on for about a month, probably the month of January. She started to complain a lot of stomach aches. And I noticed her eating less. And then it was in the first week of February of that year that, she really talked to me about what was going on.
So she came to you.
She did. She knew I was kind of curious. I was asking a lot of questions. It was her birthday, and we take a birthday trip to a nearby town that we love, that we always celebrate. And so we were there, and that was the first time that I was really like with her for an entire day, and noticing how little she was eating and how much pain she was in when she was eating. So it, she knew at that time. We had a really good relationship. We were very close. So I'm grateful for that because I think she felt comfortable disclosing to me what was going on. Yeah.
And you said the pain she was in when she was eating. And so talk to me a little bit about what.
From my perspective, I think at that point, she had been restricting so much and she was really eating very limited amounts of food. So then when we were, for example, like on that birthday trip, we went to a place that had acai bowls. And I think, what she ate, even though it was very little, it was just very rich and hard for her stomach. We went to lunch at a restaurant and, really within a couple bites of food, she was having to go to the bathroom. And we had to leave because her stomach was hurting so bad. So like physical pain from eating.
And, you're talking about those physical symptoms, and I know you're a nurse. And so, I'm curious how much that background prepared you for facing this or didn't.
Yeah.
Didn't translate at all.
No, I think it translated a lot. And I am grateful. When I think about it, there were pros and cons to having all the education and the information and experience I had as a nurse. I think the things that I'm really grateful for is that I picked up on those signs. I think that if I didn't have that healthcare background, I may not have picked up on them. Some of the things that were really hard about being a nurse is that not only just a nurse, but I'm a worrier. But, as a nurse, just really understanding, what her body was going through. And, that's my first step for anything is, okay, what's going on? And then starting to research that. I'm really grateful that I had my background, that I know reliable sources to look at, so I wasn't getting misinformed or disinformation, but it was scary understanding what was going on with her body and the reality of what eating disorders are. So that was scary.
And in your professional work, had you come across eating disorders?
I had. So I had worked as a school nurse for kindergarten through 8th grades in my hometown. And I saw kids struggle. And, I never had anybody disclose to me that that's what they were struggling with. But, my intuition and then, just my assessment, I was pretty confident that that's what it was. So yes, I had seen it and also witnessed that stigma around it of everybody keeping it really quiet. Nobody wanting anybody to know. Just like kind of like that shame that comes with it, I think. So yeah, I had seen it, but I never had anybody disclose to me, and I was never really part of like a treatment plan for it or anything.
And, would you say that your family decided to kind of keep it within the family too, or?
Yeah, at first, I think, she was diagnosed that first week of February of 2022. When Sophie first told me exactly what was going on, I remember this overwhelming like sadness and grief, like I don't want this. And I remember the first couple days it was really just I can't believe this. I don't want this for her. And then the day after she told me, it was a Sunday that she told me, and the day after she told me, I called her pediatrician. We did get an appointment, but we couldn't be seen for a couple days. So then when we did get there, and the reality of it, she ordered some tests and blood work. And as all of those results started coming back and the reality set in, I would say it was almost like a survival mode. So I don't know if I intentionally, kind of isolated myself. But I do remember that feeling of, I don't want anybody to know we're going through this right now. Like, it was too much for me to understand and to comprehend and absorb. But I was like, I don't know. I think it was that survival mode of just nobody needs to know about this. And there really is a lot of shame associated with that, I think. I felt that.
Yeah, and I mean, just like you said, it's like hard to process and then to have to verbalize it for other people and get questions. I mean, that's a lot to happen at once. So, I know that your daughter did end up going to residential treatment. And so at that point, people find out or people see some things going on. And so how did you manage that?
Really, like I said, I can't say survival mode enough because you just kind of go into that. Everybody always talks about that mama bear, that, this extreme protective nature that you have as a mom. And I felt that very much. I actually, after a couple weeks, Sophie was getting more and more ill. And I've read this too, through all of the research I've done and education I've done, is that as soon as that's found out, a lot of times it gets a lot worse. And so as soon as Sophie disclosed to me, and then the doctor knew, and these tests, the restriction was a lot more severe. And so it got to a point within a couple weeks that she couldn't go to school anymore. I was having to stay home with her. She was really not eating or drinking anything. And she began to pass out often when she stood up, because she was so dehydrated and she had no nutrition. And so it actually advanced really quickly for her. And so in that time, I remember within a couple weeks, 3 or 4 weeks, I remember I reached out to, I'm really close with my family. My mom and dad are not together, but, my mom, my dad, and his partner, who I'm very close with and that my kids are very close to. And then my two sisters and my brother. And I remember reaching out to them and saying, I just want you guys to know that, Soph has been diagnosed with anorexia, and I'm working to get her the care she needs, but I just need you to know. And so it was probably within a month that I was okay, to tell people. And then I think that's where my experience as a school nurse helped me to realize that, as hard as it was to tell people, that it was important for the school to know. Because, I mean, even the first couple weeks when she still was attending school, she was very weak, and she would tell me that she couldn't stand up to leave class because she felt like she was going to pass out. So I was really worried about her safety. And so, that knowledge of remembering what it was like, to know kids were sick, but not to really have a lot of information about it, really helped me to, push myself out of my comfort zone and say, it is important that somebody at the school knows. So I did contact the school nurse, and explain to her. And then, like I said, it was only within a couple weeks that she really wasn't even safe to be at school anymore. And so then, of course, I did reach out to her teachers at one point and said, this is where we are. And I don't have a plan yet, but as soon as I do, I'll let you know.
Well, and even that's a big chunk of time to be on your own, trying to sort through this and be there for her. And I know you also have other children too.
Yes.
And so what was sort of maybe going on, like bigger picture with your other kids, and how did you balance that so on?
I think it's all a little bit of a blur, I remember just really being hyper-focused on just taking each day one day at a time, sometimes, just like that hour at a time. There was a lot of stress in the home surrounding this. My kids are really sensitive, and, they felt the stress and the fear in me, I know. Meal times were very hard and stressful. And there was just a lot of stress around me trying to, like you said, like coordinate her care, making sure that I was contacting the right people. And it felt like a full-time job, really just trying to get everything in line that I felt needed, to be done for Sophie to be taken care of the way that I thought she needed to, be taken care of. Um, so yeah, I think that, my boys, understood, what was going on. I didn't want to scare them, but I also knew it was very obvious there was, something wrong with Sophie, so I didn't want them to be afraid. So it was kind of trying to find that balance of what do you tell them? And, they're 4 years apart, so that my younger son, trying to figure out what he needed to know. And my older son, just finding that balance, which is so hard to do as a parent and really wanting to do what's best for them. Not wanting them to be more afraid than they have to be, but also that they're informed enough that they understand how serious it was. And really, why it was so stressful around mealtime. It was a lot. It was so much. It was so hard.
And, the ages that a kid is too around that, they have such unique experiences or understandings. Yeah, what's going on, or memories of that too. Just everyone has their own story and
their own perspective of what's going on. And I remember my younger son, he was young enough. He was only 11, so he was at home more. My older son had just turned 16. So he, of course, was in that phase of he was with friends all the time. He plays 3 sports, so he was finishing, basketball season, going into track season, and really just in that phase of what he should be as a teenager, just really kind of thinking about what he wanted to do, where he wanted to be. And so for him, I know he did have a lot of support from his friends. He told me when he had let 2 of his very best friends know what was going on, and he said it felt a lot better to talk to them about it. Whereas my younger son, he didn't tell anybody. He was, more just kind of holding it all in because he didn't have a really tight group of friends and he was only 11. So I know they both had very different experiences of all of it, really.
Yeah. And I mean, as a therapist, sometimes we talk about like the family narrative around any traumatic event. And some of that just has to happen at different stages of life, and it's so much to make sense of. And, I also just really want to commend you for the mother you are to all your children. And that's a lot to have balanced.
It doesn't feel like you're doing a good job in the moment. We always think we could do better. And I think looking back, there are definitely things that I wish I could change. But, I think we always do the best that we can and with what we have and, at the time that we're given. So it was definitely a very stressful, painful, really terrifying time. And I'm grateful for the support I had because I really couldn't have done it without the people that supported me through it.
And you brought up a good point in that sort of like there's always more to be done, or maybe I don't always feel like I'm the best parent. And we know that caregivers don't cause eating disorders. And even still, a lot of parents carry guilt and shame that's hard to process. And so, maybe tell me a little bit about what that has looked like, right? Or did look like, and how you...
Yeah, it still does look like it's a present moment thing. I think that the shame for me, there's a couple different angles, I guess, that the shame affects me. First is that feeling of just as a parent that, and I felt, well, I know Soph and I had a good relationship. I didn't just feel that, I know we did. And we were close. And it's been very difficult for me to accept that I didn't see it coming sooner. Even, like I said, with my nursing background, with having kind of watched kids in that middle school age struggle with eating disorders, I just couldn't get past the fact that it took me so long, to the point that she had already been restricting for so long that her stomach could not tolerate food, and that she had lost so much weight already. Um, she was wearing what she always wears, sweatpants and, baggy t-shirts. And it was winter time, which in our hometown, I mean, winter can be anywhere from -20 to, it's cold. And so I don't know. I think that I just felt that living in the same house as her, I was so ashamed that I didn't see it, sooner than I did. Um, Another piece with this is that my own health had declined for a couple years prior, and I had gained a lot of weight. Um, so I was actually, the year before all of this happened with Soph, I was in a weight loss program that was developed by a doctor. It wasn't overseen by my doctor, but it was developed by a doctor. And it was a lot of restriction. It was special products I had to buy with a lot of protein in them, eating, really minimal like fruit or vegetables. It was extremely restrictive. But I had high blood pressure. I was on the brink of developing, type 2 diabetes. And it really was to the point that I had to do something for my health. And it was a drastic change, but it worked. And at first the weight started to come off slowly, and then as it started to come off more rapidly, and people were complimenting me and saying, "What are you doing?" And, our kids see and hear everything. And even though Soph never really asked me about it or said anything, she's always been really observant, but I know during that time she was also watching. So there's, guilt with that as well. And I think the one that is the hardest for me, and it's hard to talk about, but it's that, I've struggled my whole adult life with my own body issues and my own body image. All through high school, I never, looking back, it wasn't there. It was in college, that I remember starting to be really aware of what my body looked like compared to other people's. And I didn't like it. And that's really when I started to, restrict a little bit, exercise a lot. And I think one of my biggest regrets is that I wasn't the role model that I wish I could have been for Sophie. I would have been for Sophie of, I said all the right things, you're beautiful inside and out, and you're so strong, and, you love sports, and look what your body can do for you, which really I meant. But like I said, she's so observant, and I think she knew that that's not how I felt about myself. So I think that's really hard for me, and probably what I'm having the hardest time forgiving myself for. I think the other things I've, worked through, but that's probably the hardest thing for me, is just realizing that, we impact our kids so much in our everyday, actions. And even though I felt like I was probably saying the right things to her, and like my intention was for her to have that confidence in herself, I don't think my actions showed that. So that's hard.
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
As a therapist who's worked with families, you are absolutely not alone in anything you just said. And I just want you to know that.
Thank you.
And we're all living in a society that emphasizes that we should look a certain way, particularly for a woman. And so, I think one thing that's so important in here is that you're living in that same society as your daughter.
Yeah.
Right. And so sometimes we do a lot of self-blame towards ourselves, and then you layer the situation on. But we're all swimming in it. And so it makes sense that this is a process that you were grappling with on your own, and you did your best in trying to send these messages and affirming messages. But it's easier said than done.
It is. Yes, that's for sure.
Have you been able to have that kind of conversation with?
I have.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was really freeing for me to be able to tell her, as a parent, I really work hard for my kids to know who I am at an appropriate level, but just, I'm very comfortable telling my kids I'm sorry. Like I did the best I could, but I really know that there were some things that happened, and this is one of the things that I have told Sophie about. We've had a very big conversation around it, and she's amazing. She's so mature and smart, and it was really a freeing moment for me to be able to let that out, and that it was part of, starting that healing process for me, to be able to say it out loud to her and tell her that I was sorry that I wasn't a better role model, in that way.
And, I think that's a really powerful experience for a kid too. I think part of when we feel shame, it's like, I'm the only one who's
Absolutely.
there's something wrong with me, or I'm the only one who feels this. And for her to hear that this is something that you two could relate on,
Yeah.
I think that can be really transformative for trust too, and relationship, which you already had a really strong one.
And I think that, as I was learning and researching, I never really accepted that I had that issue. I always knew it was there, but it was just kind of one of those things that was there. I grew up, I was a teenager in the 90s. I went to college from 98 to 2002. There was no talk about this. I know looking back that most girls I knew had some form of, disordered eating or, but it just wasn't talked about. So I think that, part of when I started to read and seeing that there's a really strong link, um, children with parents who have had disordered eating or, body image issues are much more likely to have the same issues. And so I think that's when I first started to realize, and again, that wave of like shame, like I did have part to do with it. You can't help but go there as a parent. I did have part to do with this, and it is there. So yeah, it's, not only grieving and worrying about your child, but then, when you're starting to also realize all these things with you too, it's a lot. It's very hard. It's a very emotional and overwhelming time for sure.
Yeah, I mean, we heal and we grow in relationship. And, in particular, that parent-child bond. I'm not a parent, but I can only imagine how much growth happens there and how much maybe you see yourself in certain situations. And so you're dealing with, like you had said earlier, like I'm in survival mode, trying to take care of my family. At the same time, all of these things are coming up for me that I had kind of put away or thought were in the past.
Yeah.
Now, I know this is sort of jumping around, but I wanted to make sure we talked about it because, you shared you live in a rural area. That can be super isolating, and we have an enormous problem in this country with people getting access to care in rural areas. So maybe talk a little bit about what that was like for you all.
Yeah. I didn't really understand. It's so ironic because in the program that I teach, I teach about community health, and we talk about social determinants of health and health inequities, access to health care, underserved populations, and I really had never experienced that firsthand. As soon as Sophie was diagnosed at her doctor's appointment with her pediatrician immediately, who's amazing, and she immediately said, this is beyond my expertise and I need to refer you to a specialist. She said, I'm going to start looking. She said, Erin, if you can look as well, if there's somewhere that you'd rather her go, just let me know, but we're going to just work on this together. And that was really the start of what was an ridiculously painful experience of trying to find care, not only that was in network with health insurance, that was able to, take Sophie as a 14-year-old. And, because I work in New York State, the only providers that there was zero in-network providers that were certified to take care, to treat her for the eating disorder. And then on top of that, because of state lines, because she's a resident of Pennsylvania, that was a huge barrier. So then I had to go through the process, which it's absolutely awful that this day and age, there's such a tedious process to get an out-of-network provider approved, especially when your network can't give you the name of anybody that can take care of you. So that was extremely frustrating. I reached out to a couple friends I had, and one in particular said, hands down, this is the treatment place to go. And so that I kind of started that process. But it was a month, well, it was about 5 weeks of, at this time I'm working from home. Sophie is, really deteriorating every day. I'm getting more and more sick. I'm having to really be constantly, asking her, to take little sips of stuff at a time. So her health was deteriorating. I was panicking. I was terrified. My other kids were scared. There was all the, stress in the home. And then I was on the phone every day with our health insurance provider, trying to figure out. And, every time you call, so actually we were talking about this because I wanted to check in with her and just make sure there was, what did she feel was off limits, for me to talk about here. I just wanted to reassure her. And so she was talking to me a little bit and she said, "Oh my gosh, Mom," she said, "I remember laying on the couch and I remember hearing the music play for sometimes an hour or more for you on hold with the insurance companies." And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "And it was like almost every day." And I said, "I know." So even as sick as she was, she remembers that desperation and that, frustration I had of, I can't get a hold of anybody. They won't answer the phones. When they do answer the phones, they just kept talking in circles. And while you need to talk to this person, it was a nightmare. And I finally got her an appointment, an intake appointment with the treatment center, which we did virtually. And then they called us back about an hour later and they said she absolutely needs residential treatment, which was another huge fear, because they have 2 places. One was in our state, across the state, about 6 hours from home, and the other was in Florida. And so immediately that fear of, how are we going to do this? I know she needs this, but now what? It's almost that like relief of, okay, we've made contact, but now they're telling me this is what she needs. I don't know how to do it. And then it was the game of, the facility wouldn't give me a date of admission until the insurance company approved them, and the insurance company wouldn't approve that treatment center until they gave them a plan of care. But the treatment center wouldn't provide that plan of care until they approved it. It was just this game back and forth. And it was it probably was the most frustrating and maddening thing I've ever been through. When you feel as a parent that your child's in danger and that it's really this game of, we're not paying them unless they tell us this, and we're not telling them this until they let us know they're going to pay us. And in the end, it's really sad, the cost of treatment. Not saying that, we are so grateful and the care she received has been amazing. But the amount that's covered by insurance is very sad, especially when, you look at other illnesses. And I think that is still part of that stigma that our whole society has with, eating disorders or substance use disorders, is that, they're not treated the same as congestive heart failure or COPD or these other chronic illnesses that people have, that their treatments are paid for. So you add in that financial stress of, I don't know how I'm going to make this happen, but we're going to do it because she needs it. And, you love your kids more than anything. And so, yeah, that was the reality of living so rural, is that she had just turned 14, and then she was accepted at that facility, which was 6 hours from our home, and she was terrified. And anybody who has had an eating disorder, or who has taken care of someone with an eating disorder, the mental illness side of it, that it's like a whole different person. There's a whole different, personality there. And she was terrified, and she was defiant and didn't want to go. And then in Pennsylvania, we have the age of 14 at age 14, they have to give consent. And because it's treated as a psychiatric disorder and not a medical treatment, we got there. I had decided that I wasn't going to leave her. That was part of the anxiety, was that she was going to be so far from home. So I worked it out with my boss, who was amazing. They allowed me to work remotely, and I was moving away from my other kids to be near her so that she wasn't so afraid. So we got there, and then the process was very kind of sterile, and in the end, she wouldn't sign consent to stay. And as a parent, I couldn't make her stay because she was 14. So it took a long time. It took about 8 hours for her to finally agree to stay. And then, driving away from her, I'll never forget that feeling, leaving her there. I knew it's what she needed. But, I was crying so hard I had to, pull over, and I called my sister, and I was just, it was a fight every day to not go pick her up, and the stress of just being away from my boys. They were so good, thank goodness for FaceTime and things like that we could stay in touch. But the reality of what people in rural areas, these underserved areas, the trauma of the disorder itself, and, the cost of treatment involved, but then not just the cost of the treatment, but it was me living in a hotel, Airbnb for a little while, the meals out. And that's another way that I was so supported. Both of my parents just really helped me financially. My mom visited with my younger son a couple weeks after, and just, gave me that support as well, which it felt so good. I felt like I wasn't alone. Sorry, I'm kind of getting off topic, but just kind of reliving all of that. And it was, I don't know that people who live in, urban or suburban areas realize you have no access to healthcare that you need. And this is only one example, but it's hard, it's scary, and it puts a lot of stress on families that are trying to do the right thing and get their kids the treatment that they need. And I just feel very fortunate that I was at a place in my life that I was able to work remotely, because I can't imagine how it would have went if I wouldn't have been able to go with her. I don't know that it would have happened.
And, you said it in everything you said. There's the trauma of, my child also isn't present right now. They're sick. And so the need to do this is not something that they're in that state of mind to recognize. And then the insurance, logistical barriers, financial barriers, and all of that, you just are left to figure out on your own. And so what do you feel you needed from systems of care, and what do you think people need now who are going through this?
I think that's a great question. First of all, I think we need to remove barriers that keep providers who are able to take care of these people from practicing. I know that from the nursing perspective, there are many advanced practice nurses who are able to provide this care, nurse practitioners who have barriers by, collaborative agreements, by licensing. There is a licensing a compact that would allow APRNs, or registered, nurse practitioners, to practice across state lines. But a lot of states don't recognize that. And that was, between New York State and then again, one of Sophie's her outpatient team. So she went to residential treatment, and then through the same center, she had inpatient. What did they call it? I can't remember. It was a step down, like a transition out, partial hospitalization, and then intensive outpatient. And then once they discharged her from that whole process, which was about 12 weeks total, it took us about 3 months, even though we made the appointment before she was out of the program. It took us 3 months to get an appointment. It was in another state that was 2 hours away, but it was, it's one of the best hospitals in the nation. So it's the travel time there. I had to then work again to get approval for out-of-network to be approved. So they approved us for 2 appointments. That's all. So every couple appointments, I had to keep going through that process. It took us 3 months to get an appointment because they were so booked. And in that 3 months, then, there was the, basically a relapse, because I wasn't equipped to take care of her at home. I really didn't have what I needed, the knowledge I needed. And so it was frustrating. So I think, just removing those barriers of making providers more available, that I know there are people out there that want to take care, but it's all of these legalities and policies that keep people from, especially nurse practitioners, from practicing to their full extent. I don't think you want me to get started on health insurance. I think that it is just really sad that, I've worked 2 jobs my whole adult life. I am a nurse. I take care of other people, and I pay a lot of money out of pocket for health insurance, and I can't, I still can't get the care that we need. And the red tape that is there in order to get approved, it's really, it's a huge issue. And I feel like for the United States, it's a huge issue that keeps many people from getting access to the care that they need. So it's a frustrating process. I think those are probably the 2 biggest things that I can think of off the top of my head, that if things were different, I think Sophie would have had care much earlier. And she would have had access to the specialists that, she deserves to be treated by, just because nobody lives in the area of our network that's covered. That's not fair to her that she doesn't have access to the care that somebody else may have just because of where they live. Yeah.
Yeah, and you make a really good point there in this transition of care. Families are often left to their own devices, and, residential is to stabilize someone, and yet what gets left in that is, okay, let me make sure that the family feels ready to support when they go home. Let us do the work of contacting who the child needs to work with next.
Yeah.
And, it sounds like there was a big failure of the system there.
Yeah. And, when Soph and I talk about it, and she's very good, she says, residential saved my life. And she's clear and able to see that now that she's in recovery. And I do know that's true. The model that they follow, that is, evidence-based and driven by data, is exactly what they do. And they empower the person to take care of themselves. She was there with people. She was by far the youngest, but there were, older teens up into, Sophie said there were people probably about Grammy's age. So, there's a wide age range there. And so I get it, especially as a nurse and as an educator. It can't be a one size fits all, but it did save her life, and it did teach her and us a lot. They had parent therapy sessions. I had access to a social worker who was able to talk me through a little bit, but it was very much on a need-to-know basis. Because she was 14, I wasn't given the details of her care, and I wasn't given the details of her, of their model. And so when Sophie was discharged, the the partial hospitalization point, because it was during a COVID time, was actually at home. So even though she was on her computer and expected to be there, and she was in learning, and she had to eat on camera, she wasn't, she was still at home. So she was in charge of all of her meals. She was in charge of everything. I knew she wasn't eating enough. I knew she didn't have the fats and, all the macros that she needed. And that was a really tense time for she and I. We fought a lot because I was so terrified she was going to relapse, and I had literally no control because they were telling her, this is your job. And they were telling me that too. And I don't think it's at their fault. I think it's just that, like I said, it's not a one size fit all. And I don't think her brain was developed enough for her to have that capacity, basically. So when we went to her outpatient team later, like 3 months later in Ohio, they were amazing. We had a registered dietitian, and then we had a physician. And I really, think that was, even though residential saved her life, I think that the facility in Ohio is the one that really helped her into recovery and taught us both what we needed to do. And the doctor was very blunt. She does this for a living. She basically, looked at Soph and said, it is not up to you anymore. Your mom is in charge of the meals. Your mom is in charge of doing all this. And this is how it's going to be. And that was hard too. It was confusing because we had already learned a model of what was going to happen. And Sophie was very good at, okay, I need to eat this and this and this. So we had to kind of relearn, and we had to navigate a whole new model again. So it was confusing. It was a little bit frustrating. But I don't think that Sophie could have done that. She needed the residential to even get to the place that she was able to do that. So I know it all worked out the way it needed to. But I think as a parent, that's another thing that I felt really confused by. It almost felt like we were taking steps backwards. Her weight when we went to her first outpatient appointment was actually less than it was when she went into residential. So she had lost all of the weight that she had gained again and more. So it was a time of, you almost feel like you're out of the woods and that you're taking this breath of relief, like, okay, we're going to be okay. And then to see that happen because we didn't have anywhere to go, we couldn't get in anywhere. We definitely needed that appointment much sooner. And, things would have went different. But luckily, Soph is smart and she's strong. And she really did want to get better, which I know is a huge part of being able to go into recovery. She really wanted that. And I'm grateful for that because I know that's not always the case. And so I think with all of that together, we felt like we took a couple steps backwards. We'd go one forward, two steps back. But really, in the end, I think everything worked out well.
Mm-hmm. And what in all of that did you learn, and did your family learn, in terms of like how to support each other and how to support Sophie?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. It's so complicated. I learned, number one, I think the most helpful thing for me, which I did learn, is that the eating disorder is a totally different entity than your child. And that really helped me to visualize. I learned that later than I would have liked. It was when she was with her outpatient team. But it's really that, all of these things that get you frustrated, or when, the defiance, or, there's things there that are so hard. We would sit in the kitchen for an hour, trying to, prompt her to eat and just sitting through it. And, now it's a blur, but, there was help. Like, how do you do this? How do you navigate this? How do you not enable, but you're also firm? There's so much, and it's so complicated, but I do remember the point that I was able to say, this is the eating disorder and this is Sophie, and they're totally separate. That was really helpful. I forget what you asked. Was it about the support?
Mm-hmm.
Like what support?
Like how to support. Yeah.
I think I realized at that point that just knowing that somebody is there for you. They don't have to do anything. Knowing that somebody is there for you means the world. I remember my family, one of my very best friend. I had a couple friends from high school that I'd reconnected with during the time just because of where Sophie was in treatment, and they lived in the area. So I think the people that played a really big role in my life at that time, the biggest thing was just the simple text or phone call. How are you? How is Soph? Is there anything you need? Just very simple things. I didn't really need anybody to do anything. I just needed to know that nobody was forgetting that my entire world was chaos and turned upside down, So I think that would probably be the biggest message to people is that, don't be afraid to ask. And a lot of times people would say, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. I don't, that's fine too. I don't just saying that. Again, I think it goes back to that stigma associated with it. People are so afraid to even talk about it. And, that's one thing that Soph and I have talked about a lot is that that's one of our missions is that we want people to know that it's okay to talk about. And she's been really brave with that too. So as far as support, and I'm only a volunteer, no financial connections, but the National Eating Disorder Association, NEDA, really, Soph is the one who kind of discovered, and then she told me, and actually, that's not true. I remember finding it before she went into treatment, and that's when I started looking at the severity. They had questionnaires on there. I do remember that. But as far as resources, afterwards, it's a really close-knit group. All of her friends in recovery are part of it. There's a walk, which Soph participates in the one in Pittsburgh every year. And she raises money, and she was one of the top fundraisers. She was the top fundraiser a couple years ago for that. So I think it kind of gives her that feeling of action, like she's doing something to make a difference, and she really likes that. So I think that we can't underestimate the power of that support that is right there at your fingertips when you're feeling. I mean, I remember looking things up on there all the time, specific things, and there was, I think 99 times out of 100, there was something there for me that I could at least read. And again, like you said, it's that feeling of like, you're not alone. This isn't something that nobody's ever dealt with before. And that there are people out there that have been through this too, which is so comforting when you're going through that.
Well, and yeah, there's a big part of this that's like meaning making when we go through something like this, and that your daughter has found that with what she's doing in NEDA, and that you have, and that you're willing to share that.
Yeah.
Knowing that when people saw you and the pain, it felt a little bit less like you were so alone. And so you're giving that to other people.
Yeah, it feels good. It's definitely something that fills me. I've really enjoyed it.
So what do you wish that other caregivers knew?
I think that healing is in connection. It's so easy to isolate and just feel that shame and that fear. I think that's a pretty common human reaction when you're in something so deep that's so terrifying, is that you just, at least that's my tendency, I kind of withdraw, and I just think, I just have to keep focusing on this. But it really is in connecting with other people that I have healed and that I know Sophie has healed. So I would say that as much as your body and your mind is telling you, don't tell anybody, we'll get through this, nobody needs to know, or I can do this. I'm a very strong-willed person, and as much as you think, I'm going to get through this, you really do need that connection. And that's really what heals, I think.
And you're reminding me in there too that you were doing your doctorate.
Oh, yes.
At the same time, casually, through all this. And it was on, well, I'll let you talk about it if you don't mind.
So I'm a firm believer in, I have a very strong faith and, a firm believer that the universe um, does take care of us. And I started my doctorate in Doctor of Nursing Practice in Educational Leadership when I got my new job. So I started it in December of 2019. And so during my residency in the spring of 21, I had to decide what my research was going to be in. And so I had learned about mindful self-compassion specifically when I started to teach. And I had this almost that like imposter syndrome, like I shouldn't be up here teaching these people. I don't really know. There were people in the room who were older than me, who'd been a nurse longer than me because it was an RN to BSN program. And I just started to really, my excitement to start a new job and teach quickly became anxiety of, do I really belong here? And so I started to look things up, just research. How do people get over this, And I found Chris Germer is one of the founders of this. And he had, I think it was just a YouTube video on his fear of speaking in front of people and how he got over it. And so it was really intriguing to me. But then when I went to the residency and these other nurses had all these like grand, research projects they were doing, I kind of felt I needed to do something bigger. And I just really had a really strong gut instinct that this is what I wanted to do. And I'm so grateful I stuck with it because it really, that's all I read. That's all I did. And it really forced me to practice that at a time that it's probably the time I needed it most in my life. So as I was trying to develop this online training for nurses and mindful self-compassion, I'm going through all these practices and reading all these articles and finding how it, decreases anxiety and depression and burnout, and it increases joy and resiliency. And it was really everything I needed at that point in my life. So it's pretty amazing the way that everything lined up. And that is, I truly did use it. It was something that, for those of you who don't know, it's the three pillars of it are mindfulness, first of all, and just really being present and, kind of accepting this is where I am in my life. And then there's the common humanity piece, and that is that we don't isolate, that we, realize that we're not alone in this. And then the loving kindness piece of, we really need to give ourselves that same love and compassion that we give to everybody else. And it really was during this time, that all of this was going on with Soph, that I realized how hard I am on myself, how I have way too high of expectations for myself, and that I really just needed to give myself that. And it wasn't easy to do, but it was definitely something that without it, I don't know that I would have been able to really cope as well as I did, even though sometimes it didn't seem like that was well. But yeah, it definitely helped.
And yeah, to have used that at a time you needed it and to have learned about it from an intellectual perspective, to have had those two different resources, of course, that you were pushed into in a really scary way. But I'm so glad that you had that and that you cultivated that for yourself, because I think part of any sort of recovery, and for all of us recovering from anything traumatic, is the trust again in ourselves and our ability to manage life and stress. And it seems like mindfulness and self-compassion are a big part of that.
Yes, I think so too.
So before we finish, I'd love to hear a little bit about, what you're doing now and what your daughter's doing now.
Oh, yes. I'm very happy to say that I think, Soph is really more herself than I have ever seen her in her entire life. She's 17 now. She's in full recovery. She is still very involved in her recovery. She does a lot with, she has a psychiatric nurse practitioner that she sees regularly. She goes in and out of therapy, again, kind of an insurance thing. They develop a treatment plan, and then once they feel that you're okay, I think we can be done, so she does go in and out of therapy a little bit. But she is doing so well. She's found a really great balance between her schoolwork. She's still in all honors. She's worked her way back up to all the honors courses. She's thinking about college because she'll be a senior. And she's thinking about what she wants to do for that. So she's really just kind of thriving, and it's so wonderful as a mom to see that. Which also allows me to, kind of focus on other things too. So through this journey, and the lack of access to care, I was really inspired. So I actually just started back to school again. I'm gonna get my psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner degree. Yeah. So, and I'm really interested in becoming certified, to help people with eating disorders. And it's definitely a passion that I have. So I'm excited. I just started the journey, so it'll take a couple years, but I'm excited for it.
That's so awesome, Erin. I'm so happy and excited that our field will have you, because that just makes such a difference. All the levels, that you understand this and have experienced this. And I mean, for families, it means a lot and will mean a lot. So
And I remember Soph telling me during her treatment adventures, she would say, I could tell right away people who had, suffered from an eating disorder, because I could feel the connection and they really got me, and that made all the difference. And so I thought, even though personally I don't have that experience, as you said, the caregivers have their own separate experience of what happens. And so I'm excited to be able to help with that.
me too. Well, thank you so much, Erin, for joining. And is there anything else that you feel people should know or that you want to
I
share?
don't think so. I'm just excited that, like I said, we do want to share our story, and I'll let people know it's okay to speak out. So I'm very excited I had this opportunity.
Yeah. Well, Erin, you're a wonderful mother and a wonderful human, and I know a wonderful nurse, and
Thank
it's
you.
really special to have you here. And I just want you to know that I really admire your bravery and courage, and please let your daughter know too that we're really grateful
I will.
for her being open to sharing this too.
I will.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today, and see you next time.